This episode of The Clear Out was recorded on the 24th of January 2024 at home in Wicklow. And it is a deep dive into my own mental health collapse or crisis or battle that I have found myself immersed in for the last few weeks. In my opinion, it's a very calm, chilled, but very honest episode, and maybe an episode in which I treat this subject in more detail than I have ever before on the podcast. So if that's something that you think might just be a little bit too much for you, don't worry about it. Get out of here. You have my blessing. But if it's something you think, oh yeah, that could be of interest, it could be of use, I'd like to think you'll get something from it. I did the episode out of a sense of necessity for myself, for my own need to kind of process. But I also did it out of my conviction that talking about these things contributes something of use to any conversation around mental health. I think it can be of use to any individual who encounters the sharing of another's experience of depression, anxiety, and other things. And part of what I discuss, and I'm just going to say it here as, again, just as a warning in case it might be too confronting for you. I talk about suicidal ideation, my own experience of that. Now, I've talked about this in passing before and in some detail before, but this episode, I kind of go to that place. I tread carefully. I feel I walk a careful line. I don't feel there's anything gratuitous or excessive in how I talk about these topics in this episode, but it's in there. You're going to get a very clear sense of where I'm at when I'm in the middle of that kind of thing. And I hope I just hope it's something that you enjoy is not the right word, but I hope it's something you get something from. So that's what's coming up. If that sounds like it's up your street, enjoy. I said I wouldn't use that word. But and if it's not for you, don't worry about it. Get out of here. I'll be back talking about less confronting matter next week. Okay, I'll see you around the corner. Cheers.
Not gonna change my mind, leaving the dream behind, keep my emoji inside.
Hi, my name is Dara Clear and you're listening to The Clear Out. You're very welcome. I hope this finds you in good form, or at the very least managing. How's January going for you? How's this year shaping up so far? What are you up to? Where are you at? Give me the real story. I'm not interested in the fluff. And in a way, I'm deliberately articulating that for myself because that's the frequency where I'm happiest. Give me the real story. I'm not interested in the fluff. The fluff is the show. The fluff is the performance. The fluff is shiny, happy jazz hands. The fluff is the wall of cliches and sound bites, and it has no nutritional value. It's self-protecting, and I recognize that a lot of the language I use and a lot of the things I talk about. There are self-protecting aspects to that. There are self-protecting structures. Because really, when I'm talking about mental health or wellness or internal work, internal stability, internal exploration, excavation, internal renegotiation, internal landscape maintenance, the pursuit of map making of the internal topography of oneself. When I talk about all of that, I mean, really, of course, I'm talking about myself and my own ongoing, unending attempts to better understand myself. And I'm interested in that because it helps me steer the course better through life. And I'm interested in that, and I'm interested in speaking about it and writing about it and going into that space with a level of openness and transparency and qualified fearlessness, because I think it's of use. I think it's of use to other people. I think it's of use to other people to feel that there's an understanding, a recognition, a companionship, vicarious though it might be, in hearing somebody else talk about these things. And what I feel I've come to understand through my own experience is that there are always new levels of understanding to be explored, to be revealed, to be earned, and that as a concept or as a belief or as an understanding can sometimes feel exhausting. It can sometimes feel overwhelming. And this, I'm just telling you now, this episode is going to be very much a follow-on from last week's episode, where I was speaking about mental health. I was speaking about having had a tough few days, and I was looking at my coping mechanisms, how I try to frame those experiences to help me cope better. And I am going to lean into it more in this episode and really explore it in finer detail. Granular is the word that comes to mind. That's a popular word that you'll hear bandied about. Let's get granular. Let's get into the real. Let's get into the sands of this. And yeah, for that reason, you may want to just go, no thanks. You may want to go, listen, enough. Enough is enough. I can barely cope with my own head. Why do I want to step inside yours? But that's absolutely fine. So if you want to just, get the hell out of here, if you want to clear the room, if you want to hurl this podcast as far and as fast from yourself as you can, that's absolutely fine. Because this stuff can be icky. This stuff can be very discomforting, and it can be cringe-inducing, because, well, what I believe is there's two reasons. One is it could raise things that are uncomfortable for you, the listener. It could raise things that just cut a bit too close to the bone, that come too close to home. And that can bring its own cringy, I do not want to go to that place. Now, the other type of cringe is, and this is one that makes me uncomfortable as someone who's doing this and putting myself out there, is somebody indulging in, and indulging is a loaded word, I accept that, but someone who is exposing themselves and walking this line where I suppose the offer is one that could be misinterpreted as being one that's very egotistical, that's very narcissistic. An offer that's saying, look at how fascinating I am, and I'm going to wallow in my own I'm going to wallow and make public my own self-absorption, and that's cringe-inducing. That's, it's I'm struggling to find the right word. Undignified, excruciating, embarrassing, egregious, excessive, all of these things. And but that's judgmental language, and that's placing values on this exercise. And I've tried to condition myself to go, don't listen to that, ignore that, just put the stuff out there and try and keep it close to the facts and the truth of the experience. And if you can do that, if I can do that successfully, that's of use. I know it'll be of use to me. And the act of faith, and the whole nature of this podcast since its inception, the act of faith is that something does come across in the translation, something does come across in the transmission of voice and words and thoughts and emotions put into this package, this particular medium, and it manages to travel across to you, whoever's listening, and become an exchange, a shared experience. So all of that is tantamount to, if not a disclaimer, certainly a warning. And I'm hesitating to use the phrase trigger warning, because I have an issue with a lot of the language that we use nowadays, because I think it panders to a certain preciousness and a certain oversensitivity that I don't believe is that useful. But I understand why that oversensitivity exists, and I understand why people want to sort of prep the ground or establish these protective instruments so they can travel very safely through so many different spaces in the world. And although, and as I say, I understand that, but I'm more in favour of just let things be what they are. If you're bringing a level of thoughtfulness and consideration to what you're putting out there, hopefully people can understand and recognise that. But I feel like there's a lot of second guessing in the way we interact, particularly in a public format like this. There's a lot of second guessing, third guessing. Where's this coming from? What's the agenda? What's this person trying to achieve, present? In what way are they trying to manipulate me, the consumer, the listener? What do they want from me? What do they expect from this? And I mean, that can be analysed, I suppose. And certainly you've heard me talk, if you've listened to the podcast regularly, sure, yeah, I'd like you to spread the word if you like what I do here. I'd like you to bump this on to someone else. I'd like you to recommend this podcast if you feel it's worthy of that. I'd be grateful for reviews, etc. But that's all extra. It's all extra. And that, in a way, that exists in a very separate realm and a very separate zone. So my own focus, and the kind of the what I feel is the healthy focus of this podcast, my own focus remains just do the thing, whatever the thing is. And, you know, the thing is, for me, doing this, it's about trying to present honest emotional experience and honest psychological experience. And it is, as the title suggests, about getting stuff out and putting it out there to be seen, to be examined. And that was one of the initial sort of therapeutic impulses when I started the blog, The Clear Out, over 10 years ago now. That was the impulse: get this stuff out of my head because it's driving me mad, and maybe this will be a useful exercise. And over time it became this. So that's the deal, okay? And if you're not into this, you'll have switched off before you even got to this point. And if you are into it, you've stuck around. So where to begin? That is the question. I'm trying to not just go into the sort of rawness or the visceral nature of what I've been dealing with over the last few weeks. And that may come out as this continues. But I'm going to start just with this idea, and so I'm going to probably start broad and then narrow it down and sort of home in on maybe more personal aspects of this. But fundamentally, I have been in the last few weeks experiencing pretty bad mental health. And I mean, I'm already softening it, and I shouldn't. I mean, I would have to, if I'm going to be honest, I'll have to say I've been experiencing extremely bad mental health, a sort of a total mental health collapse. Now, I need to clarify this very quickly. I'm not talking about a psychic break. I'm not talking about paranoia. I'm not talking about psychosis. I'm not talking about delusions, erratic thinking. I'm not talking about any of that. And that's not really part of my own history in terms of my experience of depression, anxiety. But the recurring theme for me over the years since I was a child is the sudden, overwhelming sense of absolute worthlessness, and the conviction deep in my core that I have no value at all, and that's a very emotional state. It's very emotional. There's a deep sense of despair, sadness, loneliness, helplessness, and what accompanies it is an incredibly busy head, a busy brain that is incessantly playing a narrative of failure and a narrative of uselessness and a narrative of futility, a narrative of extreme judgment and self-loathing, to the extent where I can just despise myself. This is not broad. This has gone very personal very quickly. But I'm just trying to lay it out as clearly as I can. And the natural end point of this state, is a constant mental flirtation with suicide. Because that's, if you think you've no value and you consider yourself without, worth, that, and this is historical for me. This started when I was a teenager. This is the place I go to. It's the self-destructive impulse, because that seems like a solution, and it also seems like the easiest, quickest way to end the feeling of despair. And over the years, I've learned to not react to these, to what are extremely dark thoughts. I mean, dark thoughts is also very euphemistic, isn't it? But they are, like, they're incredibly morbid. They're violent. It's self-directed anger, judgment, recrimination, and I've learned over the years to kind of go, okay, I'm not going to freak out, even though I am freaking out, even though this state is a sort of a freaked out state. What I've learned over the years is to sort of not compound it with further judgment on top of the judgment that is happening already. And normally it passes quite quickly. It passes, after a couple of days. But this time it hasn't. This time this feeling just keeps rolling back and circling back. And I've just been trying to sort of, one of my modes of response is to avoid making any big decisions, is to go into a very self-contained, kind of controlled management mode. And sort of, I don't want to say I breathe into it. I mean, I'm trying to counsel myself to do that. But it's more, I go into this will pass, and I will make myself remain as functional as possible within this. And step gently and hold myself carefully as I move through day after day after day of this. And hopefully it will pass. And then what I consider my normal response system, my normal resources, will become available to me again. And I'll find a way to process this after the fact and hopefully be on the other side of little to no damage. Now, you can argue that's a very relative term, little to no damage, because if I've been going through recurring episodes or recurring phases of, internal war, internal hell. They're very dramatic words, aren't they? I'm not sure about that. I don't think they do it justice. But there is something very combative about it. There is something relentlessly punishing about it. And the only victory, or it's a measurable victory, is that I can get through the day and have remained functional and outward facing to a certain extent and engaging with other people in normal day-to-day activities, and with normal responses, and manage to get to bed at night and can sleep and wake up the next day and go, okay, is it still there? Has it passed? I'm still here. And it's what? It's just there. And a really important part of this sort of ever-present thing, this recurring experience, is to understand that it's not defining. And I think that's an important part of this discussion. It's an important part of how we consider this facet of what I think is a very relatable human experience. But it's really important that we don't go, oh yeah, you're the mental health guy, or you're the depressed guy, or you're the suicidal ideation guy. It's one thing that I deal with. And recurring, for anyone, I think, recurring episodes of depression or anxiety or whatever they might be, in whatever aspect of mental health fracture or mental health kind of stress or pressure. And I regard my own experience of this as sitting, I don't know, somewhere in the sort of middle range, if we're talking about extremity, or destructiveness, or as a kind of a destabilizing element. I don't consider it like way up there, because I have people in my life who are much closer to the extreme end of things, and I think a lot of people experience aspects of this at a much lower level of intensity or destabilization, and they go, oh yeah, I know what that's like. And I think, as I say, I believe this to be relatable on a lot of levels, but there are parts of this that I try to make sense of it, and I try to contextualize it, and yeah, sure, compartmentalize it. And I think, oh yeah, that's something that I experience semi-regularly, or from time to time, occasionally. It's something I'm familiar with. It's something I have experience with. And the way I try to deal with it is to understand where it comes from, and to look at my own responses and to try to avoid catastrophizing it and making it like, oh, this is who I am. I'm the guy who hits these brick walls mentally, emotionally, and, you know, my brain, my being craves the abyss, oblivion, self-destruction, disappearance. And then I come out of it and I'm like, what the hell was that? Because there's an alienation, there is a cognitive dissonance that happens, where you're kind of looking back and going, I don't know who that guy is or was, but in the moment it's all consuming. In the moment, all your other belief systems have been absolutely detonated into dust, and it's just like it's a reordering of your world. It's a reordering of everything, and nothing's good. So yeah, I mean, and the reason I'm speaking about it today is because I tried to sit down and record this episode yesterday, and I just didn't have it. I just didn't have I couldn't get away from the weight, the kind of the emotional heaviness, and the emotional heaviness that was still tethered to this very, very negative self-talk. And so I had to walk away, which was a good decision. But it's also a decision that I instantly judged and sort of compounded with, more kind of self-criticism. But then I was able to kind of, create a little circuit breaker, just let myself basically sleep for 15 minutes and get on with other things that had to be done. And I shook it off. And even today, when I came back in here to record, I was thinking, well, I just talk about movies, because I've got a bit of I've caught up on some of the movies that I didn't cover in the episode I did a couple of episodes ago about what I watched through 2023, and I was looking at the certain movies, and I was trying to put them into maybe categories of what are these movies trying to say to us, what are they trying to tell us, and how can this relate to wellness, how can it relate to mental health. And I may yet do that, but ultimately I thought, what's most urgent, or the thing that I just can't get past at the moment, is this current assault and this current sort of carnage that is happening with me internally. And I thought, well, can I just talk about this and get it out and sort of process it in this space and see if that's going to be of use to me. And I'm not sitting here going, this is easy. I'm not sitting here going, being blasé about this. I'm trying to take this very seriously. Because if I can take it seriously, that means I'm actually caring for myself. And that's one of the hardest things to do, I find, when I'm in that state. I find it really hard to extend myself love. I find it very hard to extend myself care, or any sort of positive regard. That's one of the, they're the first things to go. They're the first things to be chucked in the bin. And, a therapeutic approach that I found useful over the years, and I've spoken about it at different times in different episodes here, is to imagine someone you care about in a similar state and think how you would respond to them and what level of care and love and consideration you would extend to them. And that can be a very, when we think of that situation, it's often just instinctive and natural and go, of course, I'd extend that care to that person. But the therapeutic tool or strategy is, well, step outside yourself and view yourself and care for yourself. And yeah, that if again, when I'm sort of when I'm on the in a more normal state, where my natural sort of baseline is pretty positive, and I experience sort of a healthy level of self-regard that allows me to function in many other areas of my life, then it's kind of easy. It's easy to put a hand on my own shoulder and go, you're grand. But in the middle of a depressive episode, or this concoction of depression, anxiety, and sort of self-abandonment, it's harder to do that. And yet, like, I found myself kind of having moments of insight as I've been processing this over the last couple of weeks. And they involved, the sort of my way in was to reflect on my daughter and how she's been, because I've been very, very irritable, cranky, shouty, angry, and I've behaved badly. As a parent, I've been too many fails in terms of not insulating my daughter from my own anger. But I've spoken to her about it, and after just too much barking on my part, I've gone, listen, I'm sorry, but I'm just not feeling very good about myself at the moment, and I don't mean to speak to you that way. And as I've said here before, I always try to make clear to her, particularly in the last couple of years as she's got older. I say to her, you're not responsible for my feelings. You're not responsible for my, how I am. I said, you can affect me, and that's fine, but it's not your job to make me feel better. Because I don't want her to step into the a parenting role, which is I think my own experience as a kid was I have a mother who had a lot of anger, carried a lot of damage from her own childhood into adulthood, and it was a very defining thing in her life that she has never really successfully dealt with. I mean, that's one way to put it. You could say, well, no, she's dealt with it as successfully as anybody could with the damage that she experienced, and she should be applauded for that. But she was not afraid to, and I'm choosing my words carefully because I don't want to sort of misrepresent a more objective sort of truth, but my mother certainly used myself, my brothers, to be emotional crutches, and again I'll use a very loaded word, groom us to be more the adult to her. And I mean, look, I don't want to fully explore that here now. I mean, I have lots of thoughts about this, of course, but it's something I feel very strongly about. That wasn't a clean line. That was unfair. It was manipulative, and I think did a lot of damage. And so in my own parenting, I try to keep the line really clean and catch myself when I feel I'm not being fair. I'm not giving my daughter a chance just to be herself and be unhindered by my crap. But in any case, my observation was, my daughter was being just really nice to me. And I mean, I wasn't saying this stuff to her in a heightened, there wasn't a physical, there wasn't a visible demonstration of my vulnerability. I mean, there was a demonstration of my anger, and then a demonstration of, my regret and my kind of my openness, and I softened. I wasn't in a state that I think would have alarmed my daughter, but she has been very nice to me. I mean, and she is anyway. But I started to kind of view it differently, and you've got to appreciate I haven't been, this is from and not been in good form, and I'm taking this in bad, I'm in bad shape, let's say. But my daughter gave me these kind of really nice hugs, and the moment of sort of insight was I was kind of reflecting on it, and I just thought, oh, the way my daughter has been sort of so nice to me, and expressing something really sweet and caring towards me, just via the hug, I just suddenly had a flash that, oh, maybe that's something in her that's come from me. And I found that almost overwhelming. And even now as I speak about it, it makes me feel very emotional. Because it challenges my narrative. It challenges my negative narrative about myself, that I have no value. And it reminds me that I'm certainly at least partially responsible for the amazing, beautiful person that my daughter is. And I struggle. I struggle, and I am struggling to articulate what that means to me. I suppose what it awakens in me is sympathy for myself and care for myself, and maybe the idea that I can value myself. Now again, I don't want you to lose sight of the fact that I'm speaking about this and trying to put it into a context. This experience is coming from a frame of being in very bad emotional space and being in very bad kind of psychological space. Because when I'm not in that space, I'm much more, everything's calmer, everything has much healthier, I have a much healthier perspective, a much healthier self-regard. But that was a real moment. That was a real moment of like, oh, right. This is the through line. This is the connective emotional tissue that's positive, not negative. And of course, my wife's a very, not to I'm in no way trying to disregard my wife's influence and input and what she's passed on to our daughter, because my wife is a very caring person as well. But yeah, that was a big deal, that moment. And another thing that that I was speaking to my daughter about only yesterday. Because I was talking about something came up quite organically about my family and my siblings and our childhood, and my daughter and I were talking about it, and I was trying to lay out for her in very sort of safe terms just the idea of childhood damage and how bad childhood experiences can lead to unhappy adult lives. And again, we're speaking in very, this is a very chilled out, easy conversation back and forth. And again, my daughter just came out with this kind of real matter of fact thing that only a kid can only kind of say it as directly and unambiguously as she did. And she's like, well, like, how did you become such a great man? And I nearly drove the car off the road. And she and I know she didn't mean it in that way. She didn't mean it in the great man way. He was a great man. It was just so lovely. It just came out so easily from her. And what I took her to mean, and I was laughing at her in a nice way, but what I took it to mean is she's like, okay, so why are you so functional? Little does she know, this stuff I've been dealing with, but it was really just, God, what a great person she is. Anyway, that was just this little kind of grace moment. So somehow my daughter is centrally involved in all of this, and in my desire to sort of, in fueling my desire to cope better and not abandon myself. And so to kind of come to maybe, and I acknowledge I've done the opposite of what I said I do, to kind of come to maybe pull out from the granular level of this. And this is just going to be psychology 101, I'm sure. If you've done any work or considered this at all, you'll go like, yeah, of course. But an idea or a frame through which to view everything I've been talking about is to think about the idea of, how do you feel the world regards you? How do you think the world regards you? So, your thoughts and your feelings, your sense of how you're received by the world. And that's, by everyone. Close, far away, intimate, distant, whatever. Like every encounter. How do you feel you're being seen? How do you think you're thought of by others? And if those answers, for want of a better word, if those answers kind of fall into maybe the negative side of things, where your conviction is that people have no regard for you. Your conviction is that they see you as, whatever it might be. It's not for me to put words on that, because that's a very subjective experience. It's a very subjective conviction, or it's very subjective. It's a very subjective form of narrative building, and often stuff that we've, built or constructed over a lifetime. And those narratives are incredibly powerful. The story we tell ourselves about ourselves. Now, I think that story can change, that's a very optimistic chink of light to suddenly drop into all of this. But the point I was going to make is, what we believe others see in us or say about us, particularly on the darker side of things, this is what we believe about ourselves. So if our belief is that others see us in a very diminished way, often that's really a reflection of the story we're telling ourselves. And I had a moment last year, sometime towards in the latter third of last year, I had this moment where, again, I just found myself at a low ebb. I found myself having a more typical episode of low mental health, low emotional, being in a low emotional state. And I suddenly had this moment of clarity that part of my narrative since I was very, very young, and is that I could be discarded by everyone, no matter how close, no matter how sure in normal circumstances I was of their love and their regard and their care. There was an underlying conviction. There is an underlying conviction that I can be thrown away, that I am dispensable, that I will not be missed. I'm laughing because it's extreme. It's extreme. And, the fact that I'm laughing, there are fake laughs and real laughs. And I can tell the difference. I know them in myself. And that sort of chuckle / snigger at myself that's sitting in a healthy place, I can tell you. Because it's an acknowledgement. My rational brain goes, that's absurd. Because I have such, and I spoke about this relatively recently when I was talking about, my birthday party and how many great people were here and #blessed. And again, when I'm in what I consider my normal mode of behaviour, when I'm sitting on the more typical place I sit on my sort of mental health spectrum, emotional health spectrum, I see what I've got and I am grateful. I see the glass is half full. And it means I can look at a comment like that, or I can look at what I just said to you, this idea, this conviction I have deep down underneath everything, is that I can be thrown away. And what I can recognize then is when I've been going through what I've been going through over the last couple of weeks, is that I throw myself away. Is that I discard myself, that I abandon myself, that I become dispensable to myself. And of course that ties directly to, or links directly to, the suicidal ideation. Because it's like, throw yourself into the abyss. Throw yourself into the darkness. And it's all of a piece, isn't it? Now, I suppose from a therapeutic point of view, you go, well, why does this happen? What lets this get in? What's the trigger? What's the catalyst for the descent or the catalyst for the collapse. And to that, my instinctive answer is that, look, it could be anything. It could be any number of things. But I think in this case, there's something about the timing of, and this is just so pathetic and unoriginal and cliched. But sure, it's partly it's connected to suddenly going, all right, I've turned 50. Where am I at in my life? What do I feel I'm doing right or wrong? It's been at the start of the year and feeling, geez, I'm not sure if I have the I'm not convinced I have the resources I need to keep doing what I'm doing. And there's just a certain amount of fatigue. There's a certain amount of fatigue. There's a certain amount of, life takes a toll. And I just think there are times when there's an accumulative mental and emotional exhaustion that can leave one very vulnerable and very susceptible to a kind of a spike of existential crisis, which can be very private and very, very personal, and not something that is shared in a public space like I'm doing. And I think that's what I've been going through, and it has been extremely spiky, and there has been, fear has been an element of that, and that fear is connected to intense self-doubt, intense self-judgment, self-indictment, self-excoriation. But here I am doing this now because I think it's going to be of use. I can feel it's been of use to me over this past almost hour, just talking about it and talking through it. Yeah. And I'm not sure what the conclusion is. I mean, the conclusion is, in a general sense, if I'm speaking generally about these things and speaking to someone who's listening who might go, yeah, I know what that's like. My instinct is to go, hold yourself gently. My instinct is to go, can you accept that this comes from a real place? It's not a contrivance. Can you accept that you've got wounds? Can you accept that you might be in pain periodically or perpetually? And that's again, it's not defining, because pain comes and goes. Pain, emotional pain, mental anguish. It comes and goes. It can come to the fore and it can retreat to the background. And I don't know if I believe it ever fully goes away, but I think we come to accommodations. I think we come to places where our capacity for profound self-care is greater. And that's part of experience. It's part of getting better at holding ourselves, and understanding ourselves, and minding ourselves, and forgiving ourselves. because that can be, that can be a very powerful concept in a society and in a world that's obsessed with transcendence and obsessed with measurable success. A world that can be obsessed with winners and the celebration of winners. Feeling broken or incomplete or wounded, that can feel very, unsexy, and can bring with it these feelings that I've been talking about. But I believe, we all have it. I believe that's in all of us. I think we all carry wounds. We all carry damage. And they're a part of who we are. And I kind of love them. I kind of love the damaged parts of us. I kind of love the wound, because I think so much learning and healing can come from being unafraid to address the wound. And so many other positive impulses and experiences and what insights can come from being unafraid to look at the wound. And certainly that can lead to massively increased compassion, empathy, understanding and consideration of everybody else. And sure, to go back to what I said about this idea of what you project out to the world is really what you're thinking about yourself. And so if I've spent the last 2.5 years on this podcast talking about, the need for greater self-care and greater compassion, and increased thoughtfulness and increased mindfulness, and I'm advocating that for everyone. I mean, of course, ultimately I'm advocating it for myself, because I want that for myself. I want to be the recipient of greater care. I want to be the recipient of more effortless love, and minding. And if we're collectively stepping into that space and can allow part of ourselves to be directed towards others with that increased care, compassion, consideration, love, sympathy, regard, I mean, we all benefit, don't we? Isn't that what will make the world better on some level, on a very important level? I mean, it's not an economic solution. It's not going to solve the healthcare crisis or the education, property, whatever crisis. And yet it might, because if more and more people are aligned around more humanist kind of principles, those people will eventually end up in positions of influence, and power, and can prioritize things differently. Or is that the most ridiculously idealistic thing you've ever heard in your life? Because it might be. Oh man. Ugh. Okay, I think that's it. I think that's it for today. So look, I hope that wasn't too excruciating. I hope that wasn't too punishing. And none of this, not a single note of this, is a cry for help. I can't emphasize that enough. It's an exercise in honesty and openness and trying to be real. It's leaning into what I believe is useful in the wellness space, in the mental health space. Because I feel I've benefited endlessly from people who speak honestly about this stuff and write honestly about it and are keeping things real. It's something that I respond to and go, yeah, cool, I like that. I can use that. I'm nourished by that. So yeah. So sure, if you if there's part of you that goes, that's nice, I care for that guy, that's great. But I don't need you to be worried about me or anything like that. You should be so lucky, you say. We've all got shit going on. I get it. I know. I understand. Okay, that's it. I'm done for another week. I do feel better. This has been useful for me. I hope it's been of some use to you as well. You can respond to this if you want. You can respond to this on social media. You can put something out there in the space on Instagram. You'll find me on Instagram, the Clear Out Podcast on Instagram, Facebook. I'm there on YouTube as well. You can be listening to this on YouTube. And of course, you can just bump it around wherever you like. You can review this. You can rate it. You can recommend it. You can support this using the Patreon link, patreon.com/theclearout. You can reach out to me at theclearoutlive@gmail.com if you want to go a bit more personal and private. That's fine. And you don't have to do anything at all. That's the beauty of this, isn't it? That's what I like about podcasts. One of the things. It's free in so many ways. Okay, I'm gone. Thank you so much for listening. If you made it this far, I really appreciate it. Go easy. Mind yourselves. Care for yourselves. Care for others. The glass is half full. I'll talk to you real soon. All the best. Bye.